Nityanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Sadrusham Tattvamasyadilakshyam Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Satgurum Tam Namami. Nityanandam, and thank you for tuning in to this morning's episode of Living Advaita. If, like me, you just saw the morning message discourse, you would have heard Swamiji describe 2 hashtags we can start using. I think we are extremely lucky, not only blessed, but also very lucky to have such a young, current, technologically savvy guru who gives us even hashtags that we can start using as part of our devotional practice. So while talking about Sohamasmi, which is used within this Isavasya Upanishad, literally relating to God with the context that I am He is me, that Advaitic space, Swamiji suggested that we post about this on Twitter with the hashtag blessed to be Hindu. So I think this is one thing that all of us should really start doing when Swamiji gives us the gift of these hashtags to use. Let's not just listen to it the way we normally listen to a morning message discourse, not just discuss it in Vakyartha Sadas. Let's actually start doing it. I'm imagining Twitter just being flooded with devotional posts about Swamiji, inspired by Swamiji about Mahadeva, about whomever should be your Ishta Devata, with this as the hashtag, blessed to be Hindu. Swamiji described so beautifully the right context for prayer. So I'm going to put aside for a moment what I had originally planned to talk about in today's Living Advaita, and just to mention a little bit more about this, because I think it's such a sacred gift that he's giving us. The context for prayer that we usually hear, the wrong context for prayer, instilled in us from a young age by society, by religions that look to keep human consciousness suppressed, is that prayer is a way of asking God or asking a deity for something. We typically see prayer the way we would see begging a parent for a cookie from a high shelf. You know, when you're a little kid, if you see something that you want and it's in the kitchen out of your reach, the way that you'd go to your parent, if it's not a typical mealtime, if you want that, please, can I have that? Please, can you get it for me? When you're asking somebody for something and you know that that somebody has a privileged position over you, is higher than you, is above you, might say no, and so you're coming with that energy of begging. That might work in certain worldly areas, asking for a raise, asking for a treat, asking somebody to do you a favor. But Swamiji said so beautifully, when we go to God, we shouldn't go to Mahadeva with this feeling of being a beggar, with this feeling of being low. Swamiji explained, the moment you put Mahadeva, the moment you put God on a pedestal, automatically you make the assumption that that means you're low, you're somewhere far beneath. But he said, just because Mahadeva is high above, that doesn't mean you have to be low beneath. Realizing that state of Sohamasmi, realizing that you are He, the two are one, even while you're praying, even while you're expressing devotion, even while you're making a request or offering thanks, realizing that oneness between yourself and the divine is the true context through which we should be praying. In the same way, when you relate with the Master, when you relate with Swamiji himself, if you're trying to make Swamiji appear bigger in your inner space by reducing your idea of yourself in your inner space, neither one is going to be benefited. For one thing, Swamiji doesn't need for us to make him feel big. Swamiji realizes his avataric enlightenment. He realizes Mahadeva himself as his form. He's realized that complete inner and outer space merging into superconscious, taking on the state of the universe in which there's no longer a border. no longer an endpoint between his form and all that is around him, all that is. Now, when we approach Swamiji, knowing that he's in this supreme state, what good would it possibly do, Swamiji, for us to make ourselves feel smaller and feel low? Literally, it wouldn't do any good whatsoever, because regardless of whether we are high or low, perceiving ourselves as big or small, regardless of that, he is Mahadeva. So when we go to him, the greatest thing that we can do while approaching him is to feel that Advaita, to feel that yes, he is Mahadeva, he is in that supreme state, but he and I are also one with each other. He is existence. He is the Purnavatar, the complete incarnation of all gods and goddesses, the complete divinity merged into one form. He is that. But that doesn't mean that I'm useless and nothing and little. The fact that I get to know him, to be his devotee, to be in his sangha, to be in his presence, means I'm also a part of that. We are in that oneness. When we realize this state of Sohamasmi, instead of approaching the divine like a beggar, we approach the divine in such a friendly space. The true bhava, the true feeling connection, the true bhakti can flower in us. Swamiji gave us such a cool way to use this, Sohamasmi, making it a hashtag on Twitter. So if you have a Twitter account, I highly recommend you take this opportunity to join us in flooding Twitter with this expression of the right context for prayer, the truth about what prayer actually is. By doing this, I would recommend post a picture of yourself standing next to the murti of your Ishta Devata, maybe folding your hands before Swamiji's Atma Murti, maybe post a picture of yourself with him if you've had the pleasure of having a darshan photo taken at Inner Awakening. Maybe post a picture of yourself with one of the deities in your puja room. Anything, post a sweet picture and include the hashtag blessed to be Hindu. He also gave one other hashtag, blessed to know Sanskrit. So Swamiji was explaining that one of the greatest gifts that we have, when we can understand the Sanskrit terminology describing these divine states, the divine existence, only by understanding them in Sanskrit, we understand them as they truly are. He described that any translated version pales in comparison to the original Sanskrit verse and the original Sanskrit meaning. So you can also put the word Sohamasmi or include this entire Upanishadic verse from today's recorded satsang. And if you missed it, check my Facebook main page. I've shared it from, I think, Ma Priya Advaita, who originally posted it. You can watch the whole discourse again. It is so worth watching to catch this right context for prayer. Watch it again and tweet all of these things, include all of these hashtags, and spread that Advaitic devotion all around the internet world. One of the reasons it's so important to understand the right context for something, when there's a language barrier in any area, the two who are trying to communicate will suffer trying to understand each other, missing each other, basically becoming frustrated about each other. You might have seen this again and again in your life in the worldly world. Picture two people trying to have a conversation when neither one fluently speaks the other's language, or even if neither one even slightly speaks the other one's language. I'm sure we've all seen this before. The hand gestures that get used, the exaggerated tones, the over-enunciations, kind of talking to the other person like the other person is a little kid, trying to drill it into them. When we're having a language barrier, just in ordinary conversation, it might slow us down a little bit. But when we're having a language barrier when it comes to the divine, when it comes to our spiritual progress, when it comes to the connection we form with the Master, there can be too big of a miss. So don't let this spiritual language barrier hold you back any longer. Don't let all of these misinterpretations and mistranslations, saying that because God is above, we must be below, and saying that because the Ishta Devata is the realization of perfection, we are imperfection. Don't let all of these confusions hold you back. Realize that even as you are a devotee, you are one with the divine to whom you are devoted. Swamiji is so powerfully breaking down all of these myths, shattering all of these misinterpretations, and helping us really realize that supreme state. We are beyond blessed to have a living incarnation as our guru, who isn't just trying to make himself look big. So many gurus, so many so-called gurus, you can see them basically giving devotees half-truths. Swamiji calls these the blind leading the blind. He calls these the gurus who are just selling you the kaka biryani, the crow biryani, pretending to be selling you something good when really it's just contaminating your inner space. How blessed are we that Swamiji has declared his own mission is not just to be a leader, but to raise all of us as leaders. Not just to proclaim his divinity, but to give all of us the context to realize we are also divine. As he's building us towards Nityanandoham in December, the way is already being paved in our inner space by reminding us that when we pray, we shouldn't pray powerlessly. We should pray powerfully. We shouldn't fold our hands as beggars. We should fold our hands as saints, as a saintly practice. Not because we need something from him, but because we feel the gratitude for the oneness into which he's already initiated us. So let's take today as a day for tweeting and for Facebooking and for spreading this message on social media, the true context of prayer, Soham Asmi. I actually have one funny story that I remembered today while I was contemplating on this language barrier when Swamiji described how powerful it is to understand the Sanskrit definitions of these concepts, the Sanskrit explanations for these concepts. Once while I was living in Vancouver, I had the habit of going for a morning coffee. Every morning I would go to a particular cafe, and in this particular cafe, it was a cafe actually owned by a Vancouver couple. One was from Japan, one was born in Canada, and almost all of the employees working there were Japanese exchange students. Really, really friendly girls. They would sometimes come to my tarot studio and do translations for me, those who knew English really fluently. But one day, one of them had come into work. She was totally new. She was still learning English as a second language. Basically, she was being trained on the job site. Just the basic terminology she needed to know in order to serve coffee, to serve the baked treats. And there was a long lineup that day. And ahead of me, a few paces in the line, there was a lady from a construction crew who was working on repaving the street outside. So she was in line basically getting coffee for her entire construction crew. She was ordering something like 8 or 9 coffees. After placing her order, she stepped outside to consult with the others on her crew, and like that, the line kept moving. After a little while, her order became ready. The coffees were placed on the counter, but because she was back to work, she didn't realize that her coffee was ready. So the girl who was serving started to get a little bit agitated because the line was moving up, the counter space was compromised, she needed that area to put other people's orders. So she started yelling, "Hey, street lady, your coffee is ready. Street lady, come get your coffee." The people in the crowd started to giggle a little bit because obviously street lady is a term that we use to describe a homeless person, somebody who lives in the street. Obviously with her limited, I don't want to say skilled, but limited acclimatization to an English place, she didn't realize that. So after just a few moments, her supervisor came rushing over and whispered something into her ear. Now, I was standing a little ways back, but I can imagine that what she whispered was, avoid using the word street lady. You know, she's somebody who works on the street, but she's not a street lady. Don't call her that. So the girl really apologized. She understood that she had said something that could be conceived as insulting, and really said, okay, I won't use that terminology. I'll call something different. So after a few moments, the door opened, and she took that as her opportunity to yell at this lady again that her order was ready. And this time she yelled, "Hey, coffee is ready for the lady who works the streets." Obviously, the whole cafe just burst out laughing at that because a lady who works the streets is a term that we use for a prostitute. This poor girl was just trying to sell coffee, just trying to work with the customer. But because of the subtle language differences, obviously, if these terms, street worker, street lady, lady who works the streets, if these terms of phrase weren't used in a way that we use them, she would have been using the exact appropriate language. But because of the cultural context, what she was saying with the right words was giving the complete wrong meaning. In the same way, a lot of the times when we go to books about Hinduism that are written by a Westerner who doesn't actually know Hinduism, translating as per their intellectual understanding of the language, who knows what kind of similar errors are being made. Instead of being taught the Advaitic prayer of Sohamasmi, we might be getting taught the totally wrong concept, the total wrong way of relating with the Ishtadevata, or with the Guru, or with Mahadeva himself. Obviously, Mahadeva and Guru are the same in our Sangha, but what I'm saying is, when we go to the wrong source for a translation, for an interpretation, and for a lesson, instead of being told, the lady in the construction crew, we could be getting told street lady or lady who works the street. We need to bring ourselves to a master who has the complete understanding of the subject matter at hand. And thank Mahadeva for the fact that he himself has come down as our guru, because guaranteed when he's teaching us the Upanishad verses, he's teaching us not only what's written, not only the Sanskrit, not only the English translation, but also the complete accurate context through which to understand that Sanskrit and that English translation. So hashtag blessed to be Hindu and hashtag blessed to know Sanskrit. Let's popularize these hashtags and spread the right knowledge from the right context that Swamiji is so beautifully giving us to share with the world. I also feel that as devotees of Swamiji Paramahamsa Nityananda, it's basically our responsibility to let everyone else know what he's teaching us. Not everybody alive today has yet had the blessed privilege of coming to know Swamiji. Not everyone alive today is aware of the fact that there are deeper messages in some of these Sanskrit verses. Not everyone alive today knows that we're missing half of the content if we go to the wrong translator. So many people who are truly sincere seekers are being misled by those who only give a half-truth in their translation, by those who are only giving a half-truth in their teachings. As ones who are privileged, I say we should have a third hashtag, blessed to be devoted to Swamiji, or blessed to be Nityananda disciples. Those of us who are blessed by this, to have Mahadeva himself as Guru, shouldn't we take it on our shoulders, that responsibility, to make sure that the same teachings he's giving us, the same contexts he's teaching us, the same way he's raising us, we should be raising everyone else around us. So using these hashtags, it's not just a fun little Sangha practice, although it is a fun practice to connect with the rest of Sangha. It's not just a sweet thing that we can do because Swamiji has blessed us to do it. It's also an enriching activity that we can use to let others out there know what prayer actually is. I also remember a message Swamiji gave us once about prayer, when he was describing the right context behind Guru Puja, behind worshipping the form of the Master. He actually described why worship exists as a practice in Hinduism. And of course, there are infinite reasons. There are a myriad of different reasons. Deepening the feeling connection is one. Physically inscribing in the muscle memory the action of worship, the action of the feeling connection is one. But one message he gave that really stuck in my inner space, that I've carried with me to this day as the context for worship. Swamiji said that the moment you choose an ideal, the moment you find who is your Ishta Devata, or who is your Guru Deva, The moment you set that form, that expression of cosmic consciousness as your chosen ideal, when you start worshiping that, you start becoming that. Now, in some religions, in some traditions, worship is given putting ourselves lower, putting that ideal higher, and basically that idea is creating a deeper and deeper separation. The more we humble ourselves, the more we debase ourselves, it's not actually true humbleness. But the more we put ourselves down, even if we think that it's putting the other above, it's not. It's just creating a gap. It's reducing that devotion. It's just giving lip service. But with the context that Swamiji has given, that what we worship, we become. Every single time we do a puja, every single time we show that arti, wave that flame, every single time we chant the mantras, we are deepening our connection and we're becoming more and more one with our chosen ideal of divine. You might remember a while ago on this show, I had a special guest caller, Nirajananda Maharaj, one of the new brahmacharis in Swamiji's Sangha, and he described a feeling connection he has with Ma Lakshmi. He said that after seeing Lakshmi for the first time in the Los Angeles temple, he just felt so close to her. He just felt like he knows her. He just felt like worshiping her. Now, he comes from a Western background. He's not raised in a Hindu family. He's not even an NRI. He's not in any way, I can say he's not ancestrally connected to the Vedic tradition at all. But the moment he saw this deity, he just felt like falling at her feet, like worshiping her. So he kept going back to the temple, bringing her flowers, bringing her gifts, touching her feet, folding his hands. And when the time came for him to receive his spiritual name, without knowing all of this, and of course, as I understand it, Swamiji knows everything, but from a worldly perspective, without actually having witnessed any of this or being told about any of this, Swamiji gave him the name Niraja, which is one who is seated in the lotus, one of the names for Lakshmi. Actually, he looked up his name online. The first definition he found for it is that this is one of the names for Lakshmi Devi. Immediately when he told me about this, I understood how powerfully true it is what Swamiji tells us, that what we worship, we become that. And after he told me this, I was wondering about my own spiritual name that I've received, Ma Swarupa Priyananda. And I was thinking, Swarupa Priya, well, my chosen ideal, the deity to whom I worship, to whom I offer worship, the one I feel the deepest connection with, my own Ishta Devata, is none other than Swamiji himself. There's no other god, no other goddess, no other form of universal existence that I see as greater, more lovable, more perfect, more worthy of praise than Swamiji. So I was wondering, okay, Niraja, he's connected to Lakshmi, that's his Ishta Devata, he gets one of her names. I wonder if this also translates with the name Swarupa Priya. Just recently after that, just shortly, a little while later, maybe a week later, we were having an Ashramites meeting. And as a part of that Ashramites meeting, Swamiji called on me for something. And at first he said Sudevi, but then he immediately said, oh, Swarupa Priya. It was so close after getting the new spiritual name. After he said the name Swarupa Priya, he actually defined what it means and said that during his parivrajaka, during the 9 years of spiritual wandering, this name, Swarupa Priya, was one of the names he used for himself. It was such a powerful moment for me when he said that, because I had just been wondering about how Niraja received the name of his Ishta Devata. Suddenly I knew, wow, Swamiji also gave me one of the names of my own Ishta Devata, one of his own names. So when you worship something, when you worship a god, when you worship a goddess, when you worship the guru, the very act of your worship, when you're worshiping in that Advaitic space, realizing the oneness, realizing that by nature of the fact that you're worshiping, there's a love between the two of you. When you're worshiping not as a beggar, but as an aspect of the one to whom you're offering that devotion, you truly start to become that. you start to reflect the same qualities that you're holding up as your ideals. And as Swamiji said so beautifully in today's recorded discourse, even though you're putting your God high, 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 high up, that doesn't mean that you become low, 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 low down. By worshiping, by raising that devotion, you're also raising yourself to the height of the one to whom you give the devotion. So hashtag blessed to be Hindu, hashtag blessed to know Sanskrit, and I could say hashtag blessed to follow Nityananda. We really have to use this Twitter opportunity because the world is looking for him. When we have him, when we know him, we become the ones through whom others can reach him. So be that bridge and use those hashtags. Another thing I wanted to mention today, Swamiji has been speaking a lot lately about the way he wants his disciples to live, the way he expects his devotees to live in the world. Obviously, if you're blessed to be an ashramite, if you're living either in the Bidadi campus or in any of the international adinams, obviously, if you're living in one of the ashrams, you are living the lifestyle Swamiji prescribes. The 4 o'clock yoga, the 6 o'clock puja, 6:30 dance, 7 o'clock morning message discourse, and then throughout the day, all of the seva. If you're living, especially in the Bidadi campus, and you're living this totally, because every single person here will make sure that you're up in time for the yoga, that you're listening to the morning message, that you're doing the puja. But if you're not living as an ashramite, you might wonder sometimes, how is it that Swamiji wants us to live? Again and again and again, I've heard him say in discourses, don't work under somebody. Don't have a boss. Your only boss should be the guru. Your only boss should be the master. Because then the moment he gives an instruction, you don't need to seek an external approval to follow his instruction. The moment you decide to go to Nityanandoham in December, you don't need to apply for leave. You don't need to beg somebody. If we're not meant to go to God as a beggar, why should we have to go to some human being as a beggar? Remember I said at the beginning of this episode, in some worldly situations, going with that impression of being like a beggar works. To get something that you want from a parent when you're a child, begging sometimes works. To get something from a boss when you're an employee, begging sometimes works. But even if it works to give you the achievement of what you're after, even if you reach your goal by begging, you're not actually raising yourself by reaching that goal. You're still reaffirming for yourself that even though you get the thing that you want, you have to lower yourself, debase yourself, think less of yourself in order to get it. And so Swamiji tells us again and again, don't work under anybody. Don't have a boss. Be self-employed. When you have the self-drive, when you have the decision for your own success, you don't have to worry about long-term security or financial independence or the guarantee of medical care or any of that. You can be self-employed and still fully self-sufficient, fully have everything that you need. Recently, he's also added an update to that. Not only be self-employed, but also live off the grid. Now, if you're like me, if you're somebody who's always kind of dabbled in researching different conspiracy theories, you'll already know the power and the benefit of living off the grid. Off the grid means you're not dependent on the infrastructure supplied by the government. You become dependent on your own self-effort in order to be fed, in order to have power, in order to enjoy life, and in order to basically support yourself. Off-the-grid living includes raising your own food. Sorry, not raising. We don't eat animals. Growing your own food. And this is one thing that I used to say when I first went vegetarian, when I was a child in Canada. People would ask me, how would you define vegetarianism? And at that time on television, there would be a lot of commercials for meat saying raised in Canada or raised humanely. I would always say, I don't eat anything that's been raised. I only eat what's been grown. So anyhow, living off the grid means growing your own food, having your own power supply, having your own water, whether that's spring water or well water, collecting even rainwater and purifying it. Living off the grid is an ideal way of living because even if a societal infrastructure collapses, even if prices get suddenly hiked, even if something goes awry, you're not dependent on somebody else to fix it. You're dependent just on yourself. Now, Swamiji was saying this during the October Inner Awakening. Living off the grid and being your own boss is the lifestyle he wants for the entire Nityananda Sangha. He said all the international temples, all the international centers should be established as communities like this, off the grid and self-sufficient, self-sustained. So if you're hearing this, I highly, highly recommend, I invite you, let's start discussing this in the Living Advaita Facebook group, how we can make this practically implemented. What can we start doing to live off the grid? What can we start doing to be self-sufficient, self-sustained, without a boss? If you're already living with your own water supply, or with your own electricity supply, or with your own business without a boss above you, please share that in the Living Advaita Facebook group, and we can start raising ourselves and also raising one another into fulfilling Swamiji's ideal for how our Sangha should be living internationally. I also think it's interesting that throughout history, there have been people who have had this kind of a vision for humanity, living off the grid, being self-sufficient. And even as recently as the 1900s, we had Nikola Tesla creating huge Tesla coils, huge power stations that would allow people to live off the grid. Basically, they applied free wireless electricity. But as soon as the people funding Edison bought out his patents, all of those off-the-grid stations were destroyed. The blueprints were burnt, and his office was torched. I think now with Swamiji here, alive and in body, with all of the Vedic scriptures showing all the ancient Vedic technology, with the Gurukul students, literally geniuses, being raised and trained in Sanskrit and in the Hindu tradition, I wouldn't be surprised if even within the next few years, Swamiji surprises all of us. Maybe not me, because I just said I won't be surprised. But if Swamiji surprises the world by releasing a free, do-it-yourself, off-the-grid power source, I'm really excited about that, looking forward to it. But in the meantime, if you have any tips about this, like I said, please mention them in the Living Advaita Facebook group. The last thing I'd like to mention is that right now in Bidadi, we're excited to be having a new teacher training program, an NDY Acharya training program. So all the new brahmacharis are being trained as acharyas, and also many, many, many devotees who were just volunteering and participating in October Inner Awakening are now in the campus, ready to be trained as acharyas. So the fact that so many people around the world are being inspired and being motivated to make this world a better place for everyone, to spread Swamiji's teachings, to fully understand the teachings, live them, and share them, is very, very cool. It's very refreshing. When Swamiji was introducing about this Acharya training, one of the techniques that he gave, one of the lessons that we're going to do today, this Acharya training group, is that everyone is going to hold a mirror and basically give their lesson into the mirror, talk into the mirror. And I think it's such a nice synchronicity because just yesterday in the evening program, I was mentioning about the power of looking into the mirror, talking into the mirror, getting to know what impression you're giving the outside world, because the outside world, I was saying everything that exists in your life is a reflection of your inner space. So it's worth carrying a mirror with you, wearing a mirror, and remembering whatever is being reflected back to you is truly being reflected back to you. It's not just happening. It's not just an external situation. It's literally the response the world is giving to your inner space. So I thought, what a great synchronicity that just shortly after that, Swamiji described to us that one process we'll do in today's Acharya teacher training is holding a mirror and giving the lesson to the mirror. He said the reason for this is that when people are teaching, when people are speaking, when people are in front of an audience, we don't always know what kind of body language we're exuding, what kind of impression we're giving, what kind of faces we're making. Only when we give our discourses into a mirror, we'll see exactly what self we're projecting externally. So I recommend this even for all of you, even if you're not doing the Acharya training. At some point today, not as a completion practice, not as a completion technique, but just for the fun of finding out how others perceive you, what face and what body language you're showing to the others as you. At some point today, stand in front of your mirror and just start talking the way you would be talking if you were talking to a crowd of people. Actually, during October Inner Awakening, one of the fun side projects I got to do was work with a group of the volunteers and train them all a little bit about doing YouTube videos. So obviously some of you would already know I've had a YouTube channel for the past few years. One of the first striking messages I got for my own self after starting that YouTube channel was that when I watched my own videos, for the very first time I saw what my own body language looks like. I saw that sometimes my hands do certain things, sometimes they do other things. I saw different facial expressions I make. I noticed that sometimes instead of looking at the camera, I looked off to the side and that was distracting. By watching my own videos, I got an impression of how exactly my body language is either supporting or detracting from my message. How my facial expressions either enhance or detract from the message. In the same way, I recommend all of you should try this. If you even have a camera, do it with a camera. It can be more powerful. Set up a camera and talk and then watch your own video. But if not, sit in front of the mirror or stand in front of the mirror and just talk. And for the first time, see what others are seeing when they look at you, when you're delivering something to them. This is also similar to a practice Swamiji gave us once in a morning message discourse when he instructed all of his devotees and disciples throughout the day to take a selfie every 10 minutes. This might sound like an extreme practice, but he said it very sincerely. He said, every 10 minutes, take out your phone, take a selfie, and post it on Facebook. He said the reason for that, every 10 minutes your inner space is going to shift based on what you're doing, what you're thinking, and what's happening around you. If you take just 1 or 2 selfies during the day, usually we have the habit, we'll take a selfie when we're feeling really good. Maybe we're at some special tourist attraction, so we take a selfie to show ourselves with that scene in the background. Maybe we meet an old friend, so they pose next to us and we take our selfie showing our 2 smiling faces. Maybe we're out at a restaurant and it's our birthday, so we take a picture with the Satvik organic vegan birthday cake, just to show what we're eating. Usually when we take selfies, we're in a high state and we're showing our happiness. We're taking basically a snap to preserve and to share that joy. But Swamiji said, the face that we're showing the world throughout the day is the measure that we can use to determine whether or not the Kundalini Shakti is awakened. He said throughout the day, if you're vibrant, if you're alert, if you're wide awake, if you're radiating friendliness, if your face is showing the inner state that you're seeking to reach, then instead of just being an aspirant, you have that MIP. You're carrying the most important person. By taking selfies every 10 minutes, Swamiji said that we have the capacity to witness within ourselves whether or not we're at that state that we wish to realize. While driving the car, if we take a selfie because we're at that 10-minute mark and we're looking really frustrated, we have the frown lines, we have the wrinkle between the eyebrows, our mouth is all scrunched up and our nose is all wrinkled because we're so annoyed by the traffic. then in that moment we know, okay, while driving, the face that I'm showing the world, maybe the Kundalini Shakti isn't fully there. Suddenly, by seeing that selfie, we remember to be present and conscious and in the moment and in tune, even while driving. Suddenly, the art of driving then becomes a meditation. We raise ourselves in that state. If you're a parent and you're picking up your kids from school, and for some reason they're running late coming out the door, their shoes aren't on, or their jacket isn't done up, or their hair has become messy throughout the day, or their hands are dirty, if you realize you're at that 10-minute mark and you want to fulfill Swamiji's Guru Vak by taking your selfie, if you take it and you look mad, or you look exhausted, or you look bored, or you look drained, by seeing your face, you're also seeing how you show yourself to the world around you. Actually, I saw so many people posted these selfies on Facebook. It was great fun for the whole Sangha that day because we were all looking at each other's selfies continuously. A few people posted afterwards their experience sharing, what process they went through by doing this selfie challenge from the Master. And one lady posted something very powerful, very profound. She said that after taking those selfies every 10 minutes, she did the practice very sincerely. She didn't pose for the pictures and, make herself look the way she'd want to look in a photo. She didn't even look at what she was doing. She just took the camera and clicked it, very naturally. She said that only after posting all of the selfies, she went through and looked at all of them. And she said she suddenly realized why people sometimes say that they're intimidated by her. She suddenly realized why her kids say that they're scared to approach her. And she suddenly realized that when she goes to a grocery store, why the people at the checkout desk are unfriendly. She said that only after looking at these selfies she realized throughout the entire day, every 10 minutes, only 1 or 2 pictures have a slight smile. The rest of them, her mouth is downcast. She looks severe. She looks agitated. She looks angry. By doing the selfie challenge, taking a selfie every 10 minutes, she suddenly saw exactly how the world outside of her was responding to her. Instead of feeling that people are unfriendly, that people are silly for being scared of her, that her kids are, what's the word for it? That her kids are cowardly by being afraid to approach her. Instead of judging all the outer world responses, she suddenly took responsibility and realized how this is all reflecting her back to her. That moment she made a strong decision to follow Swamiji's teachings completely in every moment, to be aware of herself, to be aware of Advaita, to be aware of the friendliness that she seeks to share with the world, and to remember to smile. She decided to literally change herself from the inside in order to experience the best reflection on the outside. I know I've mentioned these selfies in a previous episode of Living Advaita because this was one technique Swamiji gave us that I found so transformative, so transformational for so many people. I also remember he told us that after doing all of these selfies, when we remember in any moment how we appeared in those pictures, for example, while driving, you'll remember the selfie you took of yourself driving. Or if you're a student who takes the bus, you might have taken a selfie on the bus. You remember how you look when you're on the bus. Every time you do those same actions again, you have the chance to remember the selfie that you took while doing that action. It floods you with the consciousness in that movement. If this discourse came prior to your time of joining the Sangha, I think this was about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago at the most. If you were not yet following Swamiji, I highly recommend you do this. Maybe I'll look up the actual discourse, I'll look up the YouTube video, and post it in the Living Advaita Facebook group so that you can watch it and get the full right context. But start doing it. And I would say maybe we don't have to post them all on Facebook because that time has passed. Unless you want to be really ambitious with it, go right ahead. But just for your own record, take selfies of yourself throughout the day and see what face you're showing the world. It might very powerfully show you exactly why existence responds to you the way that it does. And in this case, by existence, I mean other people. Each individual alive is a representation of the cosmic whole. So the way others are treating you, the way your friends, relatives, coworkers, strangers on the street, people who are helping like servants or store workers, restaurant servers, the way all of these people respond to you, that's how existence is responding to you. As soon as you start seeing yourself the way they see you, you'll understand exactly why the response is coming in the way that it's coming. I think I told you the last time I mentioned this subject. I call it your screensaver. The face that you show the world when you're not consciously thinking about what face you're showing. Just like when a computer is not being consciously used. When you're not watching a YouTube video or typing a message or checking your email. When you set down the mouse and leave the keyboard for a little while, a screensaver pops up. Something to just hold the space of the screen before you go into working with it again. The same way when you're not conversing with somebody, when you're not consciously making an expression, smiling at somebody or shaking your head at somebody, when you're just there. Imagine the go-to facial expression that happens when you're not thinking about it. That's like your screensaver. The other thing that this selfie challenge is good for is that you get to familiarize yourself with the screensaver. And if you choose to, you can download a new one. Update what you're showing as that screensaver when your interface isn't being used. So enjoy that technique, enjoy that process. And again, let's take a moment to be grateful for how cool our Guru is. Not only we have Mahadeva himself as Guru, but he's making himself so user-friendly, as he says. He's so updated on all the current technology that even when we're somewhere out in the world, physically far away from his form, we get to connect through Facebook, through Twitter, we get to see his selfie on Facebook, and we even get to share our own selfies with him. What a great blessing. What a great Leela he's creating. What a great divine play he's creating this time. And there's nothing that we should really focus on throughout our days but enjoying that, raising ourselves to living the way he wants us to live, which again means self-employed and off the grid, and sharing our joy and inspiration with everybody else by using the hashtags, by using Facebook, by being active on social media. Maybe in this evening's episode, I'll get into a little bit more about why we should be enriching like this, why to use social media outreach, how it benefits us and how it benefits others. In the meantime, if you have any questions for me, if you'd like some help causing your Nityanandoham in December, the date is quickly approaching, please let me know as a comment within the Living Advaita Facebook group, and I'll be happy to answer or have a call with you in one of our upcoming episodes. For now, thank you for tuning in. Nityanandam. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sarvam Satguru Padukarpanamastu. Om Nityanandam.